Before we get started in this episode, a quick announcement. As you know, I'm very passionate about acceptance and commitment therapy, and I also run a busy practice in Canberra. We're currently looking for psychologists who are registered in Australia to join our team, who are also passionate about learning about ACT. We provide supervision on a group and individual basis and training around ACT. So if this is you, if you're interested, please express your interest at strategicpsychology.com.au/careers. Look forward to hearing from you. And now back to this episode.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking. Yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
Welcome back to Better Thinking. My name is Nesh Nikolic, and my guest today is Adam Ferrier. He's a registered psychologist and also a multi-award-winning advertising creative and founder of the advertising agency Thinkerbell. He is also a leading Australian consumer psychologist, an expert in brand strategy, and an authority on behavioural economics. Adam is the author of The Advertising Effect and part of the Australian Creatives Power 20. He also is a regular on the Gruen series and has featured on The Project, Celebrity, Apprentice and ABC Radio. So he's very well known here in Australia. Absolutely enjoyable to be speaking with Adam today, talking about not only consumer psychology, but also the parallels within clinical practice and everything between as well. Really down-to-earth conversation, quite fun. I know that you'll enjoy it as well, because I certainly did, and hope you enjoy the show as much as I enjoyed recording it. A big thank you to you today, Adam Ferrier, for coming onto the show. I know you're a consumer psychologist, and that is fairly unique in the world of psychology. So thank you. And maybe we can start with, what is a consumer psychologist?
It's a good question, and I have to be careful, don't I? So I graduated. I'm going to have a very long answer if you don't mind. At school, I used to trade shares on the only landline every lunchtime at school. So lunchtime would happen, trade shares all lunchtime, hang up, go back to school, to the classes. And I was always known as the kind of the weird rich guy who played the share market. But I was failing school at the time. So I went to see a tutor, and the tutor said, "What are your interests?" And I said, "I'm really interested in people, and I'm really interested in money." And the tutor said, "I should become a consumer psychologist." And I thought, oh my God, that's perfect. I had no idea what it was. So I went and studied commerce, got a Bachelor of Commerce and Psychology, ended up getting a clinical master's in psych, and got registered as a psychologist. And so for years, I just called myself a psychologist. And then I kind of delved into the registration and all that stuff and realized you can't call yourself any of a registered body. So you can't call yourself a clinical psychologist you're registered, or a health psychologist or a neuropsych, but you can call yourself anything else if you want. So you can call yourself a dog psychologist, a consumer psychologist, a chair psychologist, whatever. So consumer psychologist it is. In the US and the UK, that's a registered term. In Australia, it's not. But I would describe myself as looking at people and their interrelationship with brands is what I think a consumer psychologist does. Or if I'm feeling evil, I'll say it's understanding why people buy the things they buy and encouraging them to buy more of the things that they buy.
It's really interesting, because I think there's an enormous overlap there. I've always felt that even as a clinical psychologist, much of our work is about selling an idea or selling a perspective. Having enough trust in the room that you're able to pose a different perspective for a client to look at, to observe, to be open-minded enough to potentially even adopt. And it's not necessarily that the psychologist is saying, I want you to agree with this or see this, but rather, I want you to have an opportunity to see how a different narrative or a different perspective might feel for you, and it's done in a in a vulnerable way. And clearly, when Mercedes go out and show us those shiny black cars and the like, it invokes a feeling as well.
It's a great point, Nesh, and it's one of the things I really hate about psychology is how little attention it pays to that, and how much it constrains the psychologists in how they think they should be doing things. My favourite ever psychologist was Albert Ellis, and I got to meet him once and had this very awkward meeting with him. But he used to bully people into behaviour change, and he used to scream at them and yell at them and bully them kind of almost to change their behaviour. And I just liked the creativity of that. I just liked the self-permission he had to act like that, to create behaviour change. And when in the scientist practitioner model, and I'll put that in quotes, you get so hamstrung on having to do the right thing in the right way that I think lots of psychologists forget that they're in the business of behaviour change. They're trying to affect the behaviour change of their clients. And anything goes to that end if you have good intentions and do no harm and so forth. And so the creativity and the marketing of the message is so important. And it's so badly taught. In fact, it's taught out of you rather than into you as a psychologist. So it's something that fucked with me actually for a long time, because when I was practicing psychologist, I practiced in the prison system for a while in private practice, but I was so concerned about getting it all right that I forgot about selling the principle of change. And I wrote a book. The first book I wrote is called The Advertising Effect: How to Change Behaviour, and it deals a little bit with the ethics of marketing, but it arcs back to the ethics of psychology, really, in that psychology needs to realise it's in the behaviour change business. Somebody's paying you to change their behaviour. And if you don't acknowledge that and look at that in the eye and say, right, that's the power dynamic we've got, that's the transactional relationship we've entered into, then everything else falls by the wayside a little bit. So I'd like to think of psychologists as being, right, you're paying me to change your behaviour. I'm now going to do everything in my power to do that. And that's just not practicing ACT or practicing CBT or whatever it is. That's drawing on all the resources I possibly can to help you get to where you need to go.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because there are, even small examples of that, whether we, whichever model we grab, obviously I'll use ACT. But when we think about it, at university, maybe it's changed these days, but certainly through my time, we weren't exposed to things like metaphors, that we look at, discussing stories and those sorts of things, because they're stickier for a client to take away. Yet, in an ACT perspective, they're a tool that's used, quite commonly, and sometimes you bring vagueness into a session to increase intrigue and open-mindedness, to kind of pull the client in. It's almost like a commercial that you don't really know what it's trying to sell for the first 20 seconds. But I
reckon you've got that vague. I reckon you've got that vagueness thing down pat.
Well, it's you've got to practice that as well, right? You got to try it.
I love what you're saying. I love the intentionality of what you're saying as well. I like how you're putting a deliberate kind of focus on how the message is communicated and how I get people to buy into this message, which comes right back as marketing. When I was a psychologist, I was really lucky. I had two kind of key models who just a year or two older than me, but bloody brilliant. One of them was called Steve Feelgood, who was this kind of maverick weirdo, but hardcore into. He used to say, I practice HCCBT, which is hardcore cognitive behavior therapy, was his thing. And then I had another mate. Then I had another mate called Thatch. And Thatch is still a psychologist practicing in the Nimbin area. And Simon Thatch is his name. He's brilliant. he used to always say to me, his ideal hour of therapy would be the patient walks in, sits down, neither of them say a word to each other for the whole hour, and then the patient leaves. And it just through whatever, there'll be some kind of change. And I just love that, because I don't know, it just broadens my mind in terms of what's possible and how to create change. And I think it's kind of beautiful.
What do you think are the elements of change, whether it's in, I mean, maybe if we just talk about as humans, whether it's in a therapy room, whether it's, from a marketing perspective, what are the fundamental, changing influences? I mean, obviously, as a consumer psychologist, you're trying to tap into this all the time, in little segments, whether it's on radio, whether it's visual, whether it's print. What makes us change, or what are the contributors?
So this is something I've looked at a lot, and because I'm basically in advertising or marketing, we need to keep things super simple, loads and loads of stakeholders. Everybody needs to buy into a message, and it needs to have a degree of robustness about it. And so I've looked at loads of behaviour change models, and think it boils down to two key ingredients, which are somebody's motivation to do something and how easy it is to do it. Motivation is made up of incentives, what's in it for me, and social norms, what are other people doing. And ease is made up of cognitive ease. Can I process the change needed? And physical ease, can I literally do it? And I reckon those four variables, put them on an XY axis, motivation versus ease, the higher up you go, the more likelihood you are to change behaviour. And there's a few different models kind of coalescing in that. There's the MOA model, there's marketing sciences, there's BJ Fogg's model. And that's the model I use all the time. And I reckon you're there or thereabouts. If you're talking about people's motivation and talking about ease, you're there or thereabouts. Motivation's a big woolly subject, so break it down into incentives for me and social norms. What are people doing around me? And I reckon you've got most of the variance there. The one thing that doesn't take into account is time and what type of change over time is the other variable that I'd like to have a more robust answer for.
And obviously, time becomes a factor of, I'm assuming, ease in particular. Well, actually, both those factors. But in the therapy room, we'd often talk about exposure therapy, that you start very slow with something because the ease is too high to jump in and do flooding. So you might kind of break it down and start at the very start and generally make your way, or it might be from a...
If you do something like systematic desensitization fast enough, it becomes flooding in a way anyway, because you compress the whole thing so much that you end up just kind of bashing through the cognitive distortions or whatever anyway. And I think the most effective stuff I ever did was in that kind of world where you just compressed everything. I don't know. I just think of a couple of examples of specific phobias we treated and stuff where we did that kind of, we just did systematic desensitization, but really, really quickly. And I was amazed. I felt like I'd actually cured, in quotes, cured somebody, and that's a word that people don't like to use. But I didn't. Somebody said to me in the prison system once, psychologists don't help, they soothe. And for years I thought, that's good enough. That'll do. I'm soothing people. But then when I got into the anxiety disorders area, I realized that you could kind of, cure people of certain type phobias and things like that.
The beautiful thing about the ACT model is, at least for me, even the way that we apply systematic desensitization or exposure therapy is really more around function, which I think taps into what you're saying in terms of, what's the motivation rather than the ease. And if someone is highly connected with function, that they're looking for the outcome, they're connected with what does this give you, i.e., for example, freedom, or freedom of movement, gives me opportunity to go visit my family member, then the willingness is much greater to bear the pain, which is it reduces the ease, or increases the ease. It makes it a little bit easier to sustain the pain for something, in the service of something important.
We talk a lot in marketing about goals-based marketing. So understand what somebody's goal is of the category. Once you understand the goal, then the person's emotion is just a self-regulating method to know whether they're getting closer or further away from that goal. So what you need to do is constantly understand the goal and put the goal in front of people. So I found that interesting. Look, the other interesting thing about this whole concept of motivation, one of the more interesting things I found out after I left university was this thing called the Benjamin Franklin effect, which basically says the best way to get somebody to like you is to get some favor. So it's the opposite of, and I can never say this word, I'm going to struggle, reciprocity, in that if you do something for me, Nesh, you're much more likely to want to do something else for me and keep on doing things for me. You're not necessarily expecting something in return. And that's because you're investing something of yourself into me. So that whole concept you spoke about before about vagueness, you're getting your patients to invest into you by leaning in, by trying to understand, by helping you connect the dots for the behavior change you want them to make. And in marketing, if you can get somebody to invest something of themselves into your brand, get them to promote it, get them to pass it on, get them to do something with it, then they're more likely to like you more because they're interacting with your brand. So if you have to have your thoughts, feelings, and actions aligned, you can either change thoughts and feelings that lead to action change, or you can change actions and then they'll post-rationalize the thoughts and feelings to make sense about action. And so that's a little, it's either a technique or a post-rationalization of what we do. But I like that. I like the idea of getting people to act first. And well, the saying we say is action changes attitude faster than attitude changes action. So and the same thing for brand preference. Brand preference tends to increase after you've bought something. So after you buy something and consume it, you tend to like that brand more than you like the brand more and then you consume it.
And that's the difference between the goal-orientated sort of marketing, which is trying to put the action in first, versus the brand marketing, which is you post-rationalize it after you've gone out and purchased it. One's got more an objective, measurable outcome to say, we want someone to do X, which is to purchase or subscribe or whatever the goal is.
I don't know. I can't quite make sense of that question, which is you reflecting back what I just said to you. So it probably means what I'm saying doesn't make sense. But in marketing has historically been really, really preoccupied with this way of measuring brand health, which is measuring awareness and then consideration, and then preference, and then buying. And it's kind of quite a fictitious model. We don't necessarily go through that kind of funnel, if you like. We normally just go, oh, God, I run out of Coke, there's a Pepsi, I'll buy the Pepsi. And then you might drink the Pepsi and like it more, and then it kind of almost goes the other way. And so, so anyway, so just getting people to act first and change their feelings second, I think is an interesting principle, whether it be for ultimate behavior change, whether it be in a therapeutic relationship with clients, get them to act, get them to interact, get them to do stuff for you, get them to get you a coffee rather than the other way around. And it's the same thing applies for brands. Like there's, if you had a client meeting at 10 and your client was 9:50 and you said, if you texted them and said, hey, you're getting a coffee, do you mind grabbing me one? I'm sure that client, 9 of those 10 clients coming up would feel closer to you for having got you a copy, for example. that make sense?
Absolutely.
Do you agree?
Absolutely. There's something very personal about a coffee. And interestingly, the world of psychology, our code of ethics says you're not allowed to do those sorts of things because you're building a relationship that's outside of the therapy model, right?
Fuck. Yeah. Okay.
But you're absolutely right, because it says there's an exchange going on. It blurs the relationship, but it would be a very powerful tool to start leaning into some of those personal sort of spaces. But that's exactly what marketing does, right? It's asking someone to do something in line with the brand. I mean, I'm assuming, if I just try and draw an example, Tesla, for example, have got an army of people who, in actual fact, started before they started their own Tesla operation, which was people who believe in renewables and, you know, green energy and looking after the earth, and they tapped into a segment that was already incredibly passionate, and obviously they have a compelling product and so on and so forth. But it's very hard for people who purchase a Tesla to be disappointed, you know, even if they've had issues with the damn vehicle or products that they sell. They're still advocates for, you know, but go Tesla, you know, we're on Team Tesla. They're so caught up in it. It's like it's a part of them.
100%. So divorcing the line between the producer and the consumer is really important. So blurring that line between who's making the thing and who's consuming the thing. And the more you can get the people consuming the thing to be in on and feel like they're co-producing the thing, the better. And just again, Nesh, coming back to your concept of vagueness, of which you are just before, I thought you were an expert, but now I'm seeing like ninja quality levels of vagueness coming out of you. That vagueness again is divorcing, is killing the line between the therapist and the patient, because you're in there together working it out. So I think you get it. The analogy with Tesla is kind of what you're practicing in your sessions, or that's the application, I guess, of your in the therapeutic relationship.
Let me switch gears a little bit and ask you about how do you work with your clients in terms of, for example, a goal-orientated program, so to speak. You know, how do you go about identifying what the goals are and doing that? That's always fascinated me, you know, to really do strong behaviour change. I came from an ABA sort of background, which is applied behavioural analysis, working with children with autism, and I tell you what, it was almost like the Skinner box in real life. In real time, where, you know, you'd be demonstrating an act that you want a child to do, and then you would physically grab their hand and make them do the act, and then you would reward them with some sort of, usually food, and you do this 30 hours a week. And obviously this is for fairly low functioning ASD children. But over time, and with that investment, you could begin to create opportunities for a child to connect the dots, you know, to hopefully see a bit more theory of mind or make these changes. So for me, the behaviourist place is so, I'm very fond of it. I'm also very aware of how much that's in the mind of someone, not ours, in terms of, I can think I'm teaching something, but I might be teaching them something completely different, and that will be revealed in 6 months' time. But I'm interested to hear about it from that marketing perspective, because I think that in so many ways is so behaviourist.
Yeah, the example you give breaks my heart, only because of the effort I hear in that for such small incremental gains. And and I think what's interesting about marketing, or the type of marketing that I'm in, is it just doesn't tolerate it doesn't tolerate that. It's a mass market game with limited resources, and so it's about trying to find the maximum impact, I guess, for the least amount of intervention. I guess we all are trying to do that to some degree. At a macro level, when I left psychology, as I said before, I had all this scientist practitioner kind of stuff in me, and I got into marketing, and everyone said, "Oh, you're a psychologist. Isn't this just like psychology?" And I was thinking, nah, this is all made up bullshit. In psychology, it's all really, really kind of rigorous. So there's nothing fucking psychological going on here at all. It's just random. And that was 20 years ago. And in the last 20 years, marketing has undergone quite a revolution, driven by really, at the very peak of it, one person, a guy called Professor Byron Sharp, who is a professor at a school called the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which is part of the University of South Australia. And they've been at the forefront of bringing marketing sciences into the world of marketing. And it's not new, but it's helped science find its voice in the world of marketing. And so there's a lot more rigor now than there ever has been before. And so the objectives are kind of evidence-based, and the solutions are kind of evidence-based. And, you know, my agency practices something called Measured Magic, which stands for Marketing Sciences Meets Hardcore Creativity, which you'll have heard some themes there before, which I've pilfered and put into a kind of central proposition. And then our agency, that's how our agency practices stuff. So we strongly believe in creativity to solve problems, and our form of creativity, if you like, is measured magic. How we apply that at a most basic level, you analyze the market, you find a key insight or a key finding of which to build an idea. You take, and that insight will help you kind of create the behavior change you want to create. You put an idea out into the world. You create an idea. My client will buy that idea. There might be 3 or 4 or 5 ideas. We select 1 or 2, and they go with one particular idea. Once we go with one particular idea, we then massage that idea out into all the different channels it needs to live and breathe in, to affect the behavior change we want it to affect. And then, so we put that into, we call that an action plan. And then we implement that action plan. And then if you see stuff out in the world, you might see ads or whatever. And then hopefully it changes behavior. But it's all pretty much there's lots of measurement put in place as well. But as they say, advertising is a weak force. There's lots and lots of determinants of behavior change, you know, weather or time of day or how the business is going or supply chain issues or whatever. So measuring the effect of advertising is a difficult thing to do.
And what sort of measures do you look at, and is it always on the back end, or are you doing things up front, for example, doing sort of group research to see how to get 50 people in a room, give them some sort of marketing and get their sort of think tank about how they feel, or is that all just so costly that it's got
no. That happens.
This whole world.
That happens a lot. Getting the people up front in the room is really important. Getting the insights, understanding how people interact with categories. Most of the time, people give you insights not in terms of brands, but in terms of a category. So people don't necessarily want any particular brand, but they want a category. So I'm thirsty, I want to drink, and then it's what drink do I want? I need to buy a new car, then it's what car. I want to have a holiday, it's then where do you want to go? So you get the insights at kind of a category level, how people interact with the category. Then you marry that, excuse me, with the behavior change you want to create, and then you apply that to the brand and what the brand actually stands for and how that brand should necessarily speak. And then the measures at that's kind of the insights at the front end. The measures at the back end are either around behavior change, so that could be sales, but it could be other intermediary measures of behavior change as well. Even things like awareness or preference, or did I interact with that? Did I see that? Did I pass that message on? And then there's brand metrics, such as how healthy is my brand? What does my brand stand for? Do people like my brand versus another brand, and so forth?
I imagine that the measuring must be the biggest headache of the lot. Or is it all pretty much built in now? I mean, obviously we're in a digital world, but trying to know the outcome must be very difficult, because you can't just slap a cookie on everyone or whatever it might be to know how do they respond or how do they engage with it, there's sort of systems that are already built that.
No, it is terrible, and the most uniform systems are based on. There was an insurance salesman course in Elmo Leonard in 1896 who developed this process of selling insurance that said, first of all, you got to get their attention, then you got to get their interest, then you got to get their desire, and then you got to get them to act. And it's called AIDA, and it's just made up by this door-to-door sales insurance person. But anyway, one of the big research companies in marketing thought that was a good model to base their marketing, their measurement tools on, and then it took off. And so the whole measurement industry has been hoodwinked by this bloody door-to-door sales insurance person from 1896. So there is no uniform way of measuring, and it's an absolute headache to this day. And the other thing is, you got lots of charlatans and snake oil salespeople saying they've got the measurement solution, which just further muddies the waters. So it's a hard thing to work our way through. But I bet you, Nesh, you have very few listeners who are really interested in the measurement of brand metrics.
I don't know. I think we've got quite an eclectic listener.
Okay. And, sorry. Maybe I was just saying, I don't want to talk about measurement anymore. Can we talk about something else?
Well, actually heard. What when you're what is it when you're trying to set up a campaign for example? Do you often nail, and where are you surprised? And I ask that question because, as a clinician, whether I like it or not, there is a little voice in my mind that's constantly talking and predicting and thinking that, my ego is so large. I think I'm brilliant. I know what my client's going to say. But the scientist practitioner says you've got to check in, right? You can't go out and assume. And more often than not, I get it wrong. There's so much I might get right, but you're trying to stand side by side with your client and obviously check in. But our mind is so assumptive, and it's launching ideas all the time. When you're working with a client, and I don't know if you and I said, how do we go out and market a tissue box? We might go out and say, people want to know about the softness or something like that. And obviously that's our assumption. How do you go about setting these ideas up, and where do you get surprised that your assumption was completely wrong, or where are you fairly confident that you're going to get it right, or are you always testing to see, you're always going back to the group think type scenario and asking, is softness actually an important factor here?
It's a wonderful question. When we do, there's a whole lot of principles we kind of try to follow. So if we turn the toilet tissue, and if we turn that tissue into toilet paper, for example, as a thing, first of all, what you're meant to do is look at, when I mentioned before about the category and the category, people wanting the category, you look at the category drivers or the category insights. So people want soft toilet paper. They want it to be strong. They don't want their fingers to poke through, all of that kind of stuff. And so then if that's kind of what they say, and then that leads you to triple ply, super soft toilet paper featuring a dog, a soft little Labrador puppy or whatever it is.
Sure.
And then that becomes, and then the other people do the same thing, and they see that it's the same. They get the same insights from the categories, so they do the same kind of thing, but they talk about it being quadruple ply, and they say it's wonderful for your bum or whatever it is. Coming back to your question, in the toilet paper category, there's a chap called Simon Griffiths who you really should get on your podcast. He's an amazing entrepreneurial chap. It's lovely. He wanted to create a toilet paper that was good for your bum, but also good for the world, and would donate 50% of its profits to build clean latrines in developing markets. And so he created that, and it was called Who Gives a Crap? And Who Gives a Crap was good. And you'd think if that was all the information I gave you, you'd think they'd put on the big pack on the big side, on the side of it, helping develop latrines, giving away 50% of profits to clean latrines and so forth. But they didn't do that. If you can hear my kids playing in the background, apologies, but they didn't do that. What they did is they made it really beautiful and really designed it and really, really cool, and all the packs look amazing. And so now, for the first time ever, people have toilet paper that looks really cool in their toilet. When you got the empty, you got the rolls there to be used. They look beautiful. So there's designed toilet paper for people. Now, you would have never have got design as a category driver when you talk to the consumers at the front end, and you would never have got that as an insight saying, "Oh, people want really cool looking toilet paper for their toilets." That would never have happened. That needs to come from an entrepreneurial mind. And so it's a long answer, but to come right back to your checking in thing, I think the more you check in, the more safe the response becomes, but not necessarily the better. And I think sometimes I constantly struggle with this concept. You're not allowed to talk about the visionary. You're not allowed to talk about the person who just has amazing, crazy, wild ideas versus the focus group. And the focus group is mediocrity. It's 20 opinions kind of building up, taking us towards the middle, versus the power of the visionary, whether it be in advertising, marketing, psychology, politics, architecture, whatever, toilet paper design. And so I think sometimes checking in and getting it wrong is overrated because you just might have been right.
It's almost the safe option, which might be okay for a larger brand. They can just continue to do the safe option. And it's harder for them to take a punt and say, let's go out and package something and this, go really creative. If leadership is afraid of, potentially damaging the brand.
It's not just coming back to your example with you checking in with your clients. You're still not getting, even though you're checking with your clients, you're still not necessarily getting reliable and valid information, are you? So if you say, look, I think you're really narcissistic to your client, am I right? Actually, a narcissist will say yes. Let's say, I'm getting that you're really anxious around bees. Is that right? And they might say no, or that's not necessarily true. I wouldn't say really anxious, but it could actually be completely the truth. Do you know what I mean? So just by checking in, I don't think you're necessarily getting to a better solution.
Yeah. And there has to be a level of courage that a psychologist can bring into the room to take it beyond what their client's necessarily saying, because you are going with clinical impression, obviously taking a good history, trying to understand what are the functional pieces and therefore proposing something to extend someone's thoughts, not just checking in around feelings, because often you'll see a feeling, but we're trying to check in with, in particular, deeper cognitions or deeper understandings of, one's past, or how people tie the dots together, as in narrative therapy.
I've seen a psychologist, not a psychologist, I think they're actually a counsellor, but I've seen a counsellor recently, or last few years or so, and he's probably been the most effective counsellor I've seen in my life. And he's also the one who talks the most. He just talks at me for quite a long time. And I find that quite interesting, just in terms of his conversation, that almost by the amount of words he's throwing at me, he's going to get something right or something that resonates. And just came right back to your original question of when do we get it wrong, or when do we assume something that's right? It's a hard question to answer, because in our industry, we're constantly checking in. We're checking in with our client, we're checking in with our consumers, there's lots of research, there's lots of opinions and so forth. And so I would say there's lots and lots of missed opportunity potentially by checking in too often, is how I'd answer that.
Mm-hmm. As in almost to a potential detriment, the pendulum swung so much that we're checking in too much, or we're too data-driven, we're trying to spend all this time and energy in getting it right, or from a clinician's point of view, continually going back to a client's representation, rather than asking them to, spending more time in actual fact examining beyond that initial thought process, because there's an automated process that always comes up, that is that repetitive nature of the mind, versus taking it further and questioning that repetitiveness to see, is there something deeper, so to speak?
Yeah, I just think sometimes the more people you ask, the more, especially when we're dealing with something that's around creativity or something, then the more often an idea can be killed or modified or hurt in some kind of way that is not exactly apparent. There's an advertising professional called Dave Trott, and he often uses the analogy of if you are sick, the most sure way to die quickly is to have an in-house physician. So if you have a doctor living in your home with you, let's say you're Elvis Presley or Michael Jackson, you're much more likely to die quickly, because if you're feeling up, the doctor will give you downers. If you're feeling down, the doctor will give you uppers. And before too long, they will kill you, because you are constantly asking the doctor, for help. And the analogy being that if you ask somebody's opinion, they'll give it to you, and then you're kind of almost obligated to act on that opinion. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily to the betterment of the outcome that you want.
That's beautiful, because I think that sort of appreciation also talks, in some sense, at least in my mind, about where psychologists come, where there's been so much awareness and push built on, the importance of mental health, and removing stigma, which I think is a great thing. Having said that, there is an unintended consequence, which has almost become that, we're all checking in on how we're feeling now, and anything outside of my desired feeling must be abnormal or must be wrong. So, we mislabel depression and anxiety so commonly. We've lost terminology like, I feel, a bit of angst and some anticipation in my body. We go and say, I'm anxious. We don't go, I'm feeling a bit nervous and I've got butterflies in my stomach. We run to anxiety straight away, and it's such a clinical term. Our system is blocked by it as well. My apologies.
Yeah, it's such a dangerous conversation, right, for us to have, especially especially for you in the helping profession, right? It's almost. I don't know. I find it fascinating. A woman I know called Bridget Delaney has written a lot about wellness, and I think her book is called The Wellness something or other. But it got turned into a Netflix series with Celeste Barber, and she looks at all the different ways you can get well. And I got her to speak to our agency recently, and she just said her favourite school of wellness are the Stoics, and looking back to Stoicism and just sucking it up, and she said there's a lot to be said for that. And again, you don't go out there and you can't say that openly, because that's what it used to be, and that was bad. But it was meant to be much more emotive now.
Sorry, Adam, my connection's cutting out a little bit there. Can you still hear me?
Can you be quiet, please, everybody? I'm just going to turn off my video. The internet connection's failed a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Not a problem. My apologies, Adam. It cut out. You were talking about obviously the dangers around that Stoicism and talking about that openly in this day and age.
Oh, okay. I just rambled a bit about Stoicism, just saying that it's really good, and I think that, you know, I think there's something to be said for just sucking it up, but again, it's a dangerous thought, because there's implications of that as well. And I don't want to say it ignorantly, but it's just to your point about how the downside of being overly demonstrative with our feelings and overly so quick to label stuff. And yes, so sometimes it can be good just to try to suck it up a bit, I think.
It is interesting, because I know, psychology is so regulated, as it should be, so that we don't have people of the fringes speaking and saying they represent psychology. So we've all got to be careful with our language. I think there's a nuanced conversation or a nuanced discussion that's important there, where I think there is definitely a time for whether I use the words in air quotes, sucking it up, or we might talk about it, in the therapy model would be validating that one's feelings are normal and making space for that, and encouraging the client to come and, have some experiential acceptance, with undesirable feelings, that we're in a world at the moment where it almost feels that everyone's so avoidant of undesirable feelings that, we have, air conditioning wars is a classic one, right? Where one person turns it up, another person turns it down, where we're intolerant to, 1 or 2 degrees of heat or cold.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
But we've got to be careful. Language, is very frightening these days. That there's almost like a psychology of fear that grabs so many of us, particularly in mediums like this that can be broadcast to lots of people. You're not allowed to step out of line. Something could be misconstrued. The lack of the nuance is a concern, that you can't have a proper discussion and understand it, because the Ellis, REBT approach and, being fairly bullying probably does have quite a great value, and, potentially could be measurable in good behaviour change. And, there's probably lots of PT trainers that have used that model that's been popularised by television in a really effective way.
Yeah, I feel, I can't believe the pressures I feel now to talking about various subjects that I never felt before, and I'm sure I've misremembered, if that's a word, Cameron Diaz's first ever film, but I do like to talk about it because I think it's a good example of what we're talking about here. Her first film was called The Last Supper, and The Last Supper was about a bunch of left-wing people who used to have a dinner party, and they used to invite to their left-wing dinner party. They lived in a small town, the most right-wing person they could find. And the right-wing person would come to the dinner party, and then they'd kill the person. And then they'd feed that person to the tomatoes. And then the next week, they'd find another right-wing person. And anyway, they ended up running out of right-wing people to kill. And so they looked at all of them, the 12 of them at dinner, and killed the most right-wing of the 12 of them. And then they killed the next one. And then anyway, they ended up only being 2 people left, and they were trying to work out who was the most right-wing out of the 2 of them. And they were fighting, trying to kill each other. And the whole premise of the movie is that the extremes, whether you agree with them or not, are fighting for your liberties. They're fighting for your beliefs. They're fighting for you to have an open playing field of freedom of thought, of expression, and so on. And it's something that I think, in particular, the left wing of politics has kind of got themselves all fucked up about in the cancel culture and so forth, is that the extremes on both sides or on any issue are really important. And we're completely now becoming intolerant of extremism. So calling someone an extremist is now really, that's a really bad thing to be an extremist. Whereas coming back to creativity and all of that kind of stuff is I worry where lopping off the edges is taking us. Is it making us more and more homogenized and more dehumanized? And then I couple that thought with all the science fiction writers portraying the future. And in the future, we're all wearing spandex. We've all got the same haircut. We've all got our pants pulled up high. We're all walking in unison. You know, look, any kind of depiction of the future kind of shows humans as kind of semi-autonomous. And I reckon it's starting to happen. Maybe when we're in this process now of modifying each other's behavior so much and regulating each other's behavior so much, we're starting to lose our humanity a little bit.
It's interesting because as you talk about that, I'm sort of seeing it play out in a therapy sort of context where it's almost like these sort of left-wing ideas or ideologies are the fear that clients experience in a room. And when they're paralyzed by that fear, they can't act. They can't go out and pursue their own personal pursuits and values because they're so afraid of, what might happen. And in some sense, there's almost like a culture going on at the moment where a lot of us are feeling afraid of engaging in particular topics because they're now topics that are frightening. We don't know if there's going to be significant backlash or some sort of negativity that comes through. It's kind of like we're becoming paralysed as individuals, maybe even as a society. And in therapy, we would encourage a client to try and be brave or courageous in the service of something much more important. But here we are feeling more and more of that pressure ourselves too, and I'd probably imagine also bending the way that we behave, maybe even in this conversation already.
Yeah, totally. And then just bring it right back to the therapeutic relationship again. I look at those beautiful experiments that Albert Ellis used to try to get his clients to do, like dragging a banana on a string as a pet, or having to call out the next stop on the tube, so everybody, or on the subway, so everybody there, coming up next stop, blah blah blah, and yes, yelling it out loud for everyone to hear. And just those public, I don't know what he called them, but almost self-shaming and realizing that nothing bad will happen if you act like an idiot in public. It's kind of a simple way of saying, the courage to be yourself, or the courage to stand against the tide, or the courage to have a big thought is needed, especially in the onslaught of public opinion in everyone in the Twitterverse and all that kind of stuff. And also, Google remembering everything forever now. It gets harder and harder to, I think, be an individual and stand out. And I liked what you said before about, if that's just the outward machinations of that, then the inward the consequence of that for everyone is greater anxiety, greater fear. It makes it harder and harder to be yourself and accept that, maybe.
It also means that we've therefore got a narrowing of behaviours that we choose. And, as a psychologist, the reason why clients are coming in is because they've got, a very narrow set of behaviours. They've got a very narrow set of thoughts and cognitions and feelings that they're targeting. And our job, in many ways, is to broaden those so that, there are more options on the table, that there isn't just a response of fear and assumptions, but rather, maybe some different perspectives of what may happen. I like what you say in terms of going out and testing it so that you can get a real life feedback loop. So if you go out and do something a bit outrageous, you actually see that no one cares, that your ego has been lying to you the whole time. You are not the center of the universe, and no one actually thinks you're special, nor do they care about you. And so it can be quite liberating to do some of those things as well. So I like that, but I think our fear is becoming higher, and our repertoire of behaviours and thoughts and actions and everything else is just narrowing, and that's a concern.
I totally agree, and it just comes back going back to the Cameron Diaz, doesn't it? And just trying to keep the playing field of possibility broad and open. I read years ago, I don't know if it's true, that if you took an Elizabethan person, if you met an Elizabethan person on the street today, that person would be locked up as being insane or being DSM'd in some way, because they would be so demonstrative and so hello and so big with their emotions, like, hello, good sir, how are you today, and all that kind of stuff. Their emotional repertoire was so broad, they'll probably be considered borderline or something, and ill in some kind of way. And that's just a data point of the chopping off of emotion. And emotional repertoire now is much tighter than it used to be. I have my son is joined us for a little bit, so there's just might be some colour and movement and atmosphere, but hopefully. Can you go downstairs now, little buddy? Please, mate. I'm on this call.
No, I think I'll come down. I'm a father of two, so that puts everything into perspective as well, doesn't it? Talking about marketing, how much we change as being, and our value systems. I used to look at cars, as a young man, and say, why would anyone get a station wagon? That's a stupid, type of vehicle. Everyone wants a sports car, don't they all know? And it's just so hilarious that the naiveness that the human condition brings, thinking that everyone else's thoughts.
What I find that fascinating, that it takes big life events to seriously change, and having kids can do that. The other thing I find really liberating, having two, my second one's quite young, is they're so different. I just feel like, oh my God, thank God, it's got nothing to do with me. They're just their own people, and I'm quite inconsequential to the whole thing in terms of how they develop. They've got their such strong personalities they're born with from day one. And we just need that. They need acceptance and love, obviously. But it is kind of liberating realizing that there's no way I can control those kids.
It's beautiful, because I think Darwin nailed it with evolution and variability, that your first will be different to your second, and vice versa, by biological design. And if it wasn't that way, we'd be in trouble. We have to have that diversity, and our children, just a pair will show you how different. And it also means that when we do look at norms in our work, whether it's in psychology or in marketing, depending on what niche you're trying to target, there is a great breadth, and every little segment now has 30 categories in it. It blows my mind. That milk. There are 50 milks out there, and there's a segment for, I don't know, oat milk and
there's an interesting study in that, isn't there? The more homogenized people become, the more fragmented categories and peanut butter and milk become. Like, what's going on there? That all this perceived choice, it just allows us to be more and more homogenized at a really fundamental human level. There's something.
It's almost like, we become adolescents again, and we're like, I've got to individualize myself. I've got to be different. I'm not going.
That's right. That's right.
Creamy peanut butter doesn't do it for me. I want crunchy or something or other. I'm a folder. Right. You're a scruncher. Adam, do you do any more clinical work at all, one-on-one with clients, or
I don't. I wish I did, and I'll get back to it. So when I was at Saatchi, I used to work for Relationships Australia and did relationship. I'm really into men's issues. I'm really into the plight of men at the moment, and so I love that. I love just having that hour or two. Hang on, little buddy. Hey, buddy, you go downstairs, and I'm going to come down very shortly. Okay, please. Hey, no, go downstairs. You got my phone. You go to play down. Tell Mum to turn my phone on for you, and then I'll come down shortly. Okay, buddy. That's what my parenting has become.
It's good to know that others are doing exactly what I'm doing as well, so I'm happy with that.
Yeah, the sad thing, the only people who don't do that are Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. They never let their kids play on phones. Like, oh, fuck, what's going on? I don't do any therapeutic work anymore. For many years, I try to balance doing work. I worked for Relationships Australia when I was at Saatchi, and Saatchi for a while used to run men's groups. I would like to do stuff in the therapeutic environment again, although my business partner says I'm a psychologist and I know enough about people to pull them apart, but I forgot how to put them back together again. So maybe it's a good thing that I'm not doing the therapeutic stuff at all.
What's your most pleasurable part of your work now? Where does your passion lie as a consumer psychologist? What floats your boat?
The thing I enjoy most about my work, and what absolutely drives me the most, is creativity. And coming up with creative ideas that engage people or screw with the world in some kind of way. So I have got a slight adolescent tendency at heart, but it does come back to this whole thing around fighting homogeneity and so on. I've always loved fucking with the world, basically, and doing things that are interesting. So when we can think of ideas or ways to approach things in fresh ways that have never been done before, or get people involved in some kind of movement or some kind of thing that didn't exist before, that's what I really get off on.
And is that something that is a flavour of each week? Is that something you're able to engage and connect with on a weekly basis, or is it the natural grind that we all feel? I'm just fascinated to understand your world.
One of the reasons why, so I always wanted to be a consumer psychologist. Just hang on a sec. Asterix, Artie, outside, please, buddy. One of the reasons I always wanted to be a consumer psychologist. One of the reasons why I left corrective services was because of the monotony of patients all the time, and that kind of tight little loop that I found myself in. And it I wanted a more dynamic kind of working environment, one where I could chop and change and do different things. And so I think working in my industry now, I can do that. And because it's part of popular culture, I can see our work in culture all the time. And then I feel that feels good and so on. I'm lucky enough now to be in an agency that's big enough, that has enough projects on the go, that there always seems to be something daily or at least weekly where I'm thinking of ideas and that genuinely creative part of the job. So I do get a lot of satisfaction from work. But a bit like you, I've also written a couple of books. I host a podcast series called Black T-Shirts, which is XXL creativity for marketers. I do public speaking, so I do like to be able to mix it up.
How has I'm just mindful of our time, just looking to wrap it up. How has psychology helped you in doing your work with within marketing, advertising, with consumers? Do you find that you draw on psychology a fair bit, in comparison to maybe your peers? Has it kind of become a little bit pushed back a little bit, or is it something you draw on quite regularly?
Psychology has helped my career in three ways. Probably the first and foremost is probably the academic placebo. So just calling yourself a psychologist has a lot of placebo power in it. That whole thing about are you reading my mind and all that stuff, it still exists, right? It's amazing. So that's probably the first and most powerful thing. The second thing is all the frameworks I've learned from psychology. So there's great power in being able to explain why and how an idea will work and how creativity works. And there's great power in being able to break stuff down to do that. And the third way that psychology works is, again, through practice in a therapeutic setting and talking to people and understanding the fundamental drivers of human behavior and how they operate. I do feel like I've got a really good understanding of people and how they operate. That third one is, obviously, you sound like a dickhead if you pretend to know how people operate at all. But so anyway, they're the three, I think.
Fantastic.
So yes, it's been, I love it. I love psychology. It's a wonderful profession, and I'm so grateful for that. For that counsellor, Kim Sawyer is his name, from Perth. I think he ended up going to prison for embezzlement or something. But anyway, I'm so grateful for him to have suggested becoming a consumer psychologist, because I really enjoy what I do.
And thank you also for doing what you do, because I am such a proponent for psychology being in so many spheres. I just think we've got so much to offer for those reasons that you raised as well. But, having, at least an informed way of viewing the world, making decisions. It's not always going to be empirical, but clinical work isn't constantly empirical, but it does have a good, strong guidance and a basis as to why we're doing things. And that's exactly what I think the marketing space does. You can't have the data for everything, but you can build a clinical impression with your experience. So, thank you for doing the work that you do, because I think we need more psychologists, to be courageous and advocate for our profession in other spaces. We've got a lot to offer, and to improve the world in many different ways, whether it's educational, whether it's in consumerism, obviously your standard, where we usually belong in therapy and the clinical settings. But organisations can use us in other things. So thank you for the work that you do and promoting psychology as well. It's very heartwarming.
Cheers, Nesh. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I'll have to do a final plug for you. Where can people find out about your work, your books, and the like?
The book books, I guess the books, Amazon, Stop Listening to the Customer, Try Hearing Your Brand Instead is one. The Advertising Effect, How to Change Behavior is the second. Black T-Shirts is a podcast on Listener and Apple and Spotify, whatever. And then my agency is Thinkerbell. And then I'm on Twitter at Adam Ferrier, and I think LinkedIn is Adam Ferrier as well.
Wonderful.
And yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Thanks for letting me do that plug.
No, I think it's useful. The more we can get out there, the better. But yeah, thank you again, and appreciate you coming on the show. I know how busy you are, and time to get back to your beautiful family.
Good on you, mate. Thank you very much. That was really good fun.
Thanks, Adam.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review, subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.